She was 19 years old. She was studying at one of Japan's most respected national universities. By every outward measure, grades, campus life, social ease, she appeared to be thriving. And in the bathroom of her Nagoya apartment, a 77-year-old woman's body was decomposing. It had been there for weeks. She hadn't called anyone. She hadn't tried to dispose of the remains. She hadn't even bothered to seal the door frame against the smell. She just kept living in that apartment, going to class, while what she had done sat in the room next to hers. But here's the part that makes this case more than just a shocking crime. If you go back to her Twitter account, to the posts she'd been making for years before any of this, she told anyone who would listen exactly what she was going to do. This is the story of a girl who poisoned classmates at 16, murdered an elderly woman at 19, and left a public trail of warnings that nobody followed up on in time. Let's start not in 2014, but in May of 2012, in the city of Sendai, Miyagi Prefecture. A 16-year-old girl, a top student, popular, admitted by her classmates to be unusually bright, met up with a female friend from junior high school at a karaoke parlor. At some point during that evening, she slipped a compound called thallium sulfate into her friend's drink. Thallium sulfate is a pesticide, at the time used in rat poison and ant killers in Japan. It's odorless and tasteless. You can swallow it and not know. And then, days later, your hair starts to fall out. Your stomach seizes. The peripheral nervous system starts to break down. The victim, a 16-year-old girl who had no idea she'd been poisoned, began losing her hair and suffering intense stomach pain. The damage to her vision was permanent. Her father later told reporters that she still lives with nerve damage. Not long after that first incident, sometime between May and July of 2012, while the girl was still 16, she struck a second time. This time, the victim was a male high school classmate. She introduced thallium sulfate into his water bottle. He suffered vision problems and pain in his arms and feet. Like the first victim, he had no idea what had happened to him. Both victims survived. Both were left with injuries that would not fully heal. At the time, the two incidents in Sendai were investigated, but no perpetrator was publicly identified and charged. The cases went quiet. Then 2 years passed. On December 7, 2014, in Nagoya, a 19-year-old first-year student at Nagoya University invited a 77-year-old woman named Tomoko Mori to her apartment. Mori had connected with the student through religious proselytizing, the kind of door-to-door outreach that is common in Japan. Somehow, between that initial contact and that December evening, the two had become acquainted enough for Mori to accept an invitation. What happened in the apartment was not a moment of rage or panic. It was deliberate. The student struck Tomoko Mori with an axe. When that wasn't enough to kill her, she strangled her with a scarf. Mori died in that apartment, and then her killer left the body in the bathroom. She didn't call anyone. She didn't attempt to conceal what she had done. She made no effort to seal the door against the smell as Tomoko Mori's body decomposed over the following weeks. A period of approximately 6 weeks, according to later accounts. She continued living there, attending university, moving through her days. In late January 2015, she returned to Nagoya and agreed to voluntary questioning at Chikusa police station. The body was discovered in the apartment bathroom. She was arrested. She had been at Nagoya University for less than a year. The thallium didn't arrive by accident. Thallium sulfate is a restricted pesticide in Japan. To purchase it legally, you had to be 18 or older. She was 16, so she used her father's credit card without his knowledge, presented herself to the seller as an adult, and said she needed it for a school science experiment. The purchase went through. She selected thallium deliberately. It is one of the more insidious heavy metal poisons available, colorless, odorless, tasteless, virtually undetectable without specific toxicology testing. It was a calculated choice, not something grabbed in a moment of passion, something researched and acquired in advance. She then administered it to 2 different people over the course of a few months. Neither victim was someone she apparently had a conflict with. There is no documented history of tension or grievance between her and her classmates in the trial record. They were people she knew, people who were, in a sense, available. The murder of Tomoko Mori followed the same underlying logic, even as the method shifted. She obtained an axe. She found someone who had come into her orbit through ordinary life. She invited her over. The killing was carried out with what the court would later describe as a strong and clear intention to kill. Afterward, she did essentially nothing. That is what investigators found so difficult to process. She left the evidence in her bathroom, continued with her daily life, and waited, not actively, not desperately, but with a kind of flat patience, for approximately 6 weeks before the situation resolved itself with her arrest. At her trial, when asked to explain her actions, she answered in a way that was startling in its directness. She said she wanted to see the process of people dying. She added that even at the time of trial, she still felt the urge to kill. That is not a statement a court, or a newsroom, or a viewer can easily place alongside the image of a bright, well-adjusted university student. But it matches, very precisely, what had been visible on her social media for years before she killed anyone. It said that she had posted on what appears to have been a Twitter account, expressing fascination with and sympathy for the perpetrators of well-known murder cases in Japan. She is reported to have written publicly that she expected to end up in prison after finishing university. People who saw those posts apparently did not report them to police. Some reports also indicate she expressed interest in dissecting the human body, not in a clinical or academic context, but in a way that those who encountered her posts found disturbing. Acquaintances described her as someone who wore boyish clothing, used male first-person pronouns, boku, or, in casual speech, and was considered popular and socially at ease at school. She was admitted to Nagoya University, one of Japan's national flagship institutions, on academic merit. Whatever she was carrying inside herself was apparently not visible in ordinary day-to-day interaction. There is no clean childhood trauma on the record, no documented abuse, no catastrophic event that the court identified as an origin. The prosecution's position, and the one the court accepted, is straightforward. She committed these crimes because she wanted to. The motive was desire, and the desire was persistent, deliberate, and ultimately acted on. This is a case that has to be handled carefully because a great deal of what has been written about it since 2014 is speculation dressed up as insight. So let's separate what's established from what's interpretive. What we know, she expressed a desire to kill people over a sustained period of several years. She acted on that desire twice with poison as a teenager and once with lethal violence as a young adult. She told investigators she still felt the urge. The court found her fully responsible, mentally competent, not impaired. What we don't know, the underlying mechanism. The defense team argued she was not mentally competent, that something in her psychological architecture meant she could not be held fully accountable. The Nagoya District Court rejected that argument in 2017. The Nagoya High Court confirmed that rejection in 2018. But mentally competent in the legal sense, capable of understanding the nature and consequences of one's actions, doesn't explain what was actually happening inside her. Criminologists who have studied this case alongside similar cases from Japan describe it as an example of predatory violence without grievance. The victims weren't chosen out of anger or fear or desperation. They were chosen because they were there and because something inside her wanted to test itself against them. That is a category of violence that is rare, genuinely difficult to predict, and extraordinarily hard to treat or address before harm is done. What makes this case particularly difficult in the Japanese context is the performance gap it represents. Japan places enormous cultural weight on academic achievement, social composure, and conformity. She performed all three flawlessly. Teachers praised her, classmates liked her, she got into a prestigious university. The interior reality was entirely different, and the interior reality was not the one anyone around her was equipped to see. But here's what keeps coming back. She didn't keep it entirely inside. She put it on social media, in public, not coded or cryptic, explicit. Sympathy for murderers, statements about wanting to kill, an expectation of imprisonment. Whether she wanted to be caught and stopped, or whether she simply didn't believe anyone would take her seriously, we can't say for certain. But the pattern is one that appears again and again in Japanese true crime. The signals existed. The signals were visible, and the system around her, like most systems, didn't treat them as actionable until after someone was dead. In March 2017, the Nagoya District Court sentenced her to life in prison. She was 21 years old. Presiding Judge Koji Yamada described her crimes as self-centered, cruel, and cold-blooded, carried out with a strong intention to kill. She appealed. In March 2018, the Nagoya High Court upheld the sentence, rejecting the mental incompetence argument. She was expelled from Nagoya University in late 2015. As of the time of writing, she remains incarcerated, serving a life sentence. Tomoko Mori was 77 years old. She had knocked on a door to share something she believed in. That's the entirety of the connection between them. She had done nothing wrong. She had no way of knowing that the student who welcomed her in had already poisoned 2 teenagers and carried thoughts of violence that she'd been announcing online for years. The 2 young people who drank thallium in 2012 didn't know either. They trusted someone they knew. They handed her a cup and drank from a bottle and had no idea what had been done to them until their hair started falling out. The nerve damage, the vision loss, those things don't disappear when the sentence is handed down. The question this case presses on and refuses to let go of is the question of what we do with the things people tell us about themselves. Her posts were accessible. They were not hidden. Someone had to decide whether a disturbing statement online was a warning or just noise, and nobody made that call in time. Most people who say dark things never act on them. That's true, and it's important. Drawing the line between alarming expression and credible threat is genuinely hard, and getting it wrong in either direction has real consequences. But across this case, and across several others in Japan's recent true crime history, the same pattern keeps appearing: a trail of public statements, a visible interior life, and a response that came too late. There's no comfortable resolution to this one. The law was applied correctly. The right person is serving a sentence. But 2 classmates will carry the physical effects of thallium poisoning for the rest of their lives. And Tomoko Mori is gone, because something that was visible didn't become something actionable until it was already over. Thank you for watching. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and stay with us, because the only reason to go through cases like this one is to understand them a little better.